For 2 years, the forest had been slowly dying. But no one truly listened. Then one morning, the snow collapsed, burying everything. And a Navy SEAL and his dog ran in to save lives. From that moment on, the town began to see the truth. And they chose him to stand up for them. But overnight, that same hero became the one they doubted. As a different story was carefully created, and the only witness who knew the truth was a dog who could not speak when he couldn't be bought. They chose to turn the entire town against him. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep sharing meaningful stories. Now let's begin. For 2 winters in a row, the land had been trying to tell them something. Not loudly, not in storms or headlines. Just quietly, persistently, like a warning spoken to people who no longer listened. The slopes above Alder Ridge had begun to move. At first it was subtle. A fence post leaning where it had once stood straight. A narrow trail sagging inward like a tired spine. Then came the crack's thin lines splitting the frozen ground, widening each time the sun lingered a little longer over the snow. People gave it names to make it feel manageable. Seasonal shift. Normal thaw. Just the mountain breathing. But Dr. Hannah Reeves never called it that. She was in her early 40s, tall and composed, with ash-brown hair always pulled into a low, practical knot at the nape of her neck. But her skin was pale from long hours spent under clouded northern skies, and her eyes cool gray, almost analytical to a fault rarely softened when she spoke about the land. She wore field jackets that smelled faintly of pine resin and soil, and boots that had seen more erosion sites than social gatherings. She called it soil failure. And when she said it like a verdict. The root systems are gone, she had told the town council months ago, standing before a projector that no one really looked at. You remove enough trees, you remove the structure. The soil doesn't hold. It doesn't negotiate. It collapses. Someone had coughed. Someone else had checked their phone. Because just beyond the windows of that room, the machines of Iron Vale Timber were still running. And those machines meant jobs. Heat. Groceries. Survival. Warnings didn't pay for fuel. So the report was filed. Not denied, just placed somewhere it wouldn't interrupt anything important. And the mountain kept listening. And the morning it finally answered was painfully bright. Sunlight spilled across the snow like something clean, something innocent. The kind of light that made people forget how cold the air actually was until it burned their lungs. The slope above Alder Ridge didn't roar at first. It sighed. A low, shifting sound like weight, adjusting itself after holding too long. Then came the break. Snow gave way. Then earth. Then everything. Trees tilted, snapped, and were swallowed as the hillside folded in on itself. A white wave mixed with dark soil surged downward, silent for a fraction of a second, before sound returned all at once. Cracking wood, shouting voices, the deep, impossible sound of the ground no longer being ground. Caleb Rourke was already moving before anyone called his name. 35 years old, 6 feet tall, built lean and hard like something shaped by necessity rather than vanity. His face was clean-shaven, exposing the sharp geometry beneath square jaw, or defined cheekbones, the kind of structure that never quite softened even when he tried to relax. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, just slightly longer than regulation, as if he had allowed himself one small rebellion after leaving the service. His skin carried the mark of northern windlight, but weathered. And his eyes, gray-blue, steady, The kind that didn't rush to judgment, but had already seen enough to recognize patterns others missed. A former Navy SEALs. The kind of man who didn't wait for permission when something went wrong. He didn't think. He moved. Beside him, already ahead of him, was Maddox. The German shepherd cut through the snow like it belonged to him. Around 5 or 6 years old, his coat a layered mix of cream, gray, and black sable tones that shifted under the light like a living shadow. His amber eyes were sharp, alert, always searching. The black harness strapped across his body bore a faint red trim subtle, worn in places, but still visible. He didn't bark. He never barked without reason. Instead, he ran straight toward the collapse. The air near the slide was wrong. Too still in some places. Too loud in others. People were shouting names, digging with bare hands, slipping, falling, getting back up again because there was nothing else to do. Maddox slowed. That was the first sign. He didn't charge blindly into chaos. He circled once, nose low, breathing in layers of scent that no human could separate. Snow, soil, fear, something metallic, something alive. Then he stopped. One spot. No hesitation. He began to dig. Caleb dropped beside him instantly. The snow was dense, packed with dirt and splintered branches. It resisted at first, then gave way in chunks that cut into his gloves. He tore them off. Faster. Bare hands now. Cold bit into his skin immediately, sharp and unforgiving. And he didn't register it as pain-just information. Dig here. Faster. Deeper. Maddox shifted slightly, adjusting position by inches, as if correcting a line only he could see. Caleb followed. Always followed. At first, there was nothing. Just resistance. Wait. Time stretching in a way that made seconds feel like decisions. Then, fabric. A sleeve. A hand. They pulled her out together. Iris Nolan. She was younger than Caleb expected, late 20s maybe. Her hair, a soft shade between brown and gold, was damp with melted snow and clung to her face in uneven strands. Her skin was pale, flushed at the edges from cold exposure, and her lips had begun to lose color. She was slight, not fragile, but not built for this kind of force either. The kind of person who lived more in classrooms than in storms. A teacher, someone would later say. But in that moment, she was just someone who had almost not been found. Caleb cleared her airway, steady hands moving with practiced precision. His breath came slower than the urgency around him, and controlled in a way that didn't match the chaos. "Stay with me," he said, not loud, not panicked, just certain. Maddox stood over them, still watching. Not restless, not confused, just present. Iris coughed. A small sound, but it broke something open in the air. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Her eyes fluttered. For a moment, they didn't focus. Then they did. And the first thing she saw was not the man holding her, but the dog. Maddox didn't move. Even as people shouted, even as others rushed past, he stood completely still, staring at Iris with an intensity that felt disproportionate. Not like recognition, not like curiosity, like confirmation. Iris blinked, dazed, her gaze locked on him, and for a fraction of a second too brief to prove, too real to dismiss. It felt as if the dog had already known she would be there. Not found. Expected. Then Caleb shifted. The moment broke, and the world rushed back in around them. Easy, Caleb said, helping her sit up. She was shaking now, shock settling in where adrenaline had been. Her hands clutched at his sleeve without realizing it, fingers tightening against the worn fabric of his tactical shirt. Up close, she noticed details: the faded olive gray color, the softened material, the faint red of a thermal layer beneath. This wasn't someone dressed for appearances. This was someone dressed to endure. "You're okay," he told her again, quieter this time. Iris nodded, though her eyes drifted back to Maddox. She started, voice raw. "He found me?" Caleb glanced at the dog. Maddox had already moved on, circling again, searching for the next scent, the next life beneath the snow. "Yeah," Caleb said simply. He did. Around them, the rescue continued. More digging, more voices, more moments balanced between loss and survival. But something had shifted. Not in the mountain, in the people. They had seen it now. Not a report, not a warning, a consequence. Later, when the immediate chaos began to settle into something quieter, something heavier, Iris sat wrapped in a blanket near the edge of the site. Dr. Reeves stood nearby, speaking in low, urgent tones to a county official who suddenly seemed very interested in listening. Evan Pike lingered by his truck, arms crossed, watching everything with the slow attention of someone who missed very little and said even less. And Caleb stood apart. Maddox returned to him without being called. The dog pressed briefly against his leg, not for reassurance, but as if checking in. Caleb rested a hand on his head, fingers brushing through the thick fur between his ears. Grounding. For both of them. From across the clearing, someone said it, not loudly, but clearly enough. "We should have listened." No one answered, because there was nothing to argue with anymore. The sunlight hadn't changed. It was still bright, still clean, still indifferent. But now it illuminated something else entirely. Not just what had happened, but what had been ignored long enough to happen. Caleb looked up at the slope, at the torn line where the earth had given way, at the trees that no longer held anything together. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because somewhere in that silence, something else had already begun. Not in the mountain, but in the people who had finally seen it move. The mountain did not move again that day, but something else did. It shifted quietly, like frost loosening from a branch, not visible all at once, but undeniable once you noticed the change. By late afternoon, Alder Ridge had stopped pretending nothing was wrong. The snow still glowed under a pale northern sun, but the brightness felt dishonest now, like a clean shirt worn over a wound that hadn't closed. People gathered, not because they were told to, because they no longer knew where else to go. The town hall stood near the center of Alder Ridge, a modest wooden structure that had seen more quiet meetings than urgent ones. Its windows fogged easily in winter, trapping heat and conversation inside like something fragile. That evening, it held more people than it had in years. Boots tracked snow across the floorboards. Jackets brushed against each other. Voices overlapped. Not loud enough to become shouting, but not calm enough to settle. Fear had a sound. It wasn't screaming. It was people talking at the same time, trying to outrun their own thoughts. Iris Nolan sat near the back at first. She still wore the same coat from earlier navy wool, slightly too thin for what the day had become. Her hair, now dry but still uneven from where ice had clung to it, framed a face that hadn't fully returned to warmth. There was a faint redness across her cheekbones, the kind that came from cold exposure and adrenaline fading too quickly. She looked smaller, sitting down. But her eyes didn't. They were steady green hazel, sharp in a quiet way. Not defiant, not fragile, just unwilling to forget. Every time someone said, "It could have been worse," her fingers tightened around the edge of the bench, because she knew exactly how close worse had been. At the front of the room, Dr. Hannah Reeves stood again. Not with a projector this time, just a stack of papers in one hand, and the kind of posture that came from being ignored too many times to waste energy softening the message. "You've seen it now," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It always did, precise, clipped, like each word had been measured before it was allowed out. This isn't seasonal. It isn't normal. And it doesn't stop here. Someone shifted uncomfortably. A man in a heavy jacket spoke from the side mid-50s, broad-shouldered, beard thick with gray, the kind of face shaped by winters rather than time. "We've had slides before," he said. "Not like this, but—" "Not with compromised root systems," Hannah cut in. "Not harsh, just exact. Not with this level of removal in the upper slopes." Silence followed. Because this time, no one could say they hadn't seen it. Near the doorway, his leaning back against the wall, stood Caleb Rourke. He hadn't intended to come inside. Crowds weren't something he sought out anymore. Too many variables. Too many voices layered over each other, until meaning got lost somewhere in the noise. But Maddox had followed the people in. So Caleb had followed Maddox. The dog sat now beside him, alert but still. Amber eyes tracking movement without restlessness. The black harness across his back caught the light faintly, the red trim along its edge, a small, steady line in a room full of shifting energy. Caleb's posture was relaxed in appearance only. Weight balanced evenly, eyes scanning without seeming to. Listening. Always listening. The conversation moved in circles at first. Some wanted answers, some wanted reassurance, some wanted it all to go back to the way it had been, before cracks in the ground started answering questions no one had asked out loud. Then the name came up, not loudly, but clearly. Caleb saw it up close. A few heads turned, and then a few more. Caleb didn't move. He felt it before he acknowledged it, the shift of attention, the way a room subtly rearranged itself around a single point. It was familiar. Not comfortable, but familiar. "I'm not a scientist," he said, before anyone could ask him to be something he wasn't. His voice was low, steady. No edge. No attempt to command the room. Just present. "I don't have data." He paused. "But I know what a slope looks like before it gives." That was enough to quiet the room, not because of authority, because of recognition. A woman stepped forward, late 60s, small frame, silver hair pulled into a tight braid down her back. Her name was Martha Ellery, a lifelong resident whose family had lived in Alder Ridge before most of the current buildings existed. Her voice trembled slightly, but not from weakness. From weight. "You pulled my grandson out today," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't like being pointed at for things that had already happened. "You didn't leave when it got bad," she continued. The room listened differently now. Not waiting. Measuring. "We need someone who doesn't leave." A murmur spread, not agreement yet, but alignment beginning to form. From the side, another voice pushed back. "You think one man's going to stop a company like Iron Veil?" The speaker stepped into clearer light. Tom Barrett, mid-40s, lean but worn, with a permanent crease between his brows. His jacket bore the logo of Iron Vale Timber, faded from use rather than pride. He wasn't a villain. He was a man with a mortgage, 2 kids, and a job tied directly to the machines cutting into the hills above them. "You shut them down. You shut us down," Tom added. "You ready to feed the town when that happens?" The room split not loudly, but unmistakably. Fear didn't always oppose truth. Sometimes it just stood in the way. Caleb exhaled slowly. This part was harder than the mountain. Because the mountain didn't argue. It just collapsed. "So, I'm not here to take anything from you," he said. His eyes moved across the room, not searching for agreement, just making sure the words landed somewhere real. "But if the ground keeps giving way," he stopped. Not for effect, because he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone had already seen the ending. Maddox stood up. No warning. No command. His head turned not toward the people, but toward the far wall, where nothing had been said, nothing had moved. His body stiffened, not aggressive, not fearful. Alert. Focused. For a second, maybe 2, his ears angled forward as if catching something too faint for anyone else to hear. Then, just as quietly, he sat back down. The room hadn't noticed. But Caleb had, and for a brief moment, something colder than the air outside settled under his ribs. The sense that not everything in this situation was as visible as it should be. The conversation resumed, but the energy had shifted. Less scattered now. More directed. People weren't asking if something needed to be done anymore. They were asking who would do it. Iris stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But with a kind of steadiness that drew attention without demanding it. "I was under that snow," she said. Her voice was softer than most in the room, but it didn't get lost. Long enough to stop thinking clearly. A few people lowered their eyes. She didn't. "I heard digging," she continued. "Before I could see anything." Her gaze moved, just briefly, toward Caleb, then to Maddox. "I don't know anything about land reports, or contracts, or how to fight a company." A pause. "But I know what it looks like when someone doesn't hesitate." Silence followed. Not empty, but full. Dr. Reeves nodded once. Not approval. Acknowledgement. "We need representation," she said. "Someone who can speak clearly, stay consistent, and not be influenced." The word hung there. Everyone understood it. Eyes returned to Caleb. Not all of them. But enough. He didn't step forward, didn't raise his hand, didn't accept anything. Not yet. "I don't want this," he said. "No apology, no hesitation, just truth. And if I do it, I don't do it halfway." That was the part that mattered. More than willingness, more than confidence. Martha Ellery gave a small, tired smile. "That's exactly why it has to be you." Tom Barrett looked away, not convinced, but not arguing anymore. Because even he knew there were things money could fix, and things it couldn't hold together once they started to fall. Caleb glanced down. Maddox met his gaze. No instruction passed between them. None needed. The dog didn't decide for him. He never did. But he didn't leave either. Caleb looked back up at the room, at the people who had lived here their entire lives, at the ones who depended on the very thing now threatening them, at the quiet understanding that had begun, not unanimous, not clean, but real. He nodded. Once. Not acceptance, not fully, but enough to begin. Outside, the snow reflected the last of the daylight. The mountain stood still again. For now. Inside, something else had started to move, not collapsing, rising, slowly, carefully, like roots trying to find something solid again beneath them. The decision did not echo. It settled, like snow that didn't melt when it touched the ground, quiet, final, and heavier than it looked. By the next morning, Alder Ridge had already begun rearranging itself around the idea of Caleb Rourke standing in front of something bigger than the town. Not officially, not on paper, but in the way people spoke his name. Lower now, more careful, as if it carried consequence. The air outside his cabin was sharper than usual. Cold in a way that didn't just bite skin, it reached deeper, settling into joints, into memory. The kind of cold that made every breath visible, like proof that something inside you was still working. Caleb stood on the edge of the tree line, boots pressed into snow that hadn't yet been disturbed. Maddox moved ahead of him. Not far. Never far. The dog's gait was steady, controlled, and each step placed with intention, as if the forest were something to be read, not crossed. His sable coat caught the pale morning light in shifting tones, cream along the legs, darker along the spine, black shading the edges like a shadow that never fully left him. The harness on his back black with a worn red trim sat like it belonged there. Not equipment. Identity. Caleb didn't bring a weapon. He didn't need one to understand the terrain. The forest behind Alder Ridge was not wild in the way people imagined. It was structured, ordered, and that order had been disrupted. He could see it without looking for it. Trees cut at inconsistent intervals, tracks that didn't belong to locals, fresh tire imprints where no official road had been approved. He crouched, brushing a gloved hand over a shallow indentation in the snow. Too clean. Too recent. Behind him, a voice carried through the cold air. You get used to seeing it. Or does it always feel wrong? Caleb didn't turn immediately. He recognized the voice. Measured, slightly dry. The kind of tone that didn't waste words trying to soften truth. Dr. Hannah Reeves stepped closer, boots crunching lightly over the surface. Up close, she looked more tired than she had in the meeting hall, lines around her eyes deeper, her posture still straight, but carrying the weight of something she had been repeating for too long. Her coat was zipped high, gloves tucked into one pocket, papers held loosely in the other. I don't get used to it, Caleb said finally. He stood. But I stop expecting it to make sense. Hannah gave a small, almost humorless nod. That's about right. They walked a short distance together. Not side by side. Offset. Like two people used to operating independently, but aware enough to move in the same direction. The upper slope's worse than what they've logged, Hannah said. They've been cutting beyond their reported boundaries. Caleb glanced toward the ridge. On purpose? Negligence or intent doesn't matter when the result is collapse, she replied. But yes, on purpose. She paused, watching Maddox move ahead. He's not just trained, is he? Caleb's gaze followed the dog. No. That was all he offered. It was enough. Further up, the forest changed. Subtly. The spacing between trees widened, not naturally, but with the precision of removal rather than growth. Branches lay broken in ways that didn't follow wind patterns. And beneath the surface, something else. Maddox stopped. Not abruptly. Gradually. His pace slowed, then stilled. His head lowered, nose hovering just above the snow, His breathing shifted shorter, more focused, pulling in layers of scent that no human could parse. Caleb watched. He didn't interrupt. Didn't call him back. He trusted the pause. Maddox stepped sideways. Once, then again. Not digging, not barking, just repositioning small, deliberate movements, as if aligning himself with something invisible. Then he froze. Completely. One paw lifted slightly off the ground, held there not out of hesitation, but restraint. Caleb felt it before he understood it. That subtle tightening in the air, that sense that something beneath the surface was not just present, but waiting. Not alive, not moving, but placed. Intentionally. "Don't," Hannah said quietly behind him. Not a command. A warning. Caleb stepped forward anyway. Slowly. Each movement calculated, weight distributed carefully, boots pressing down in a way that tested the ground before trusting it. He knelt, brushed away the top layer of snow with controlled precision. White gave way to darker ice. Then, metal. A trap. Not for large game, not for anything that belonged this deep in the forest. A steel jaw, partially concealed, its edges lined with thin ice. Set recently. Hannah exhaled, the sound sharp in the cold. "That's not logging equipment." "No," Caleb said. His voice didn't change, but something behind it did. He didn't touch the mechanism, didn't trigger it. He studied it. Position, angle, placement relative to the path. This wasn't random. It wasn't carelessness. It was placed where something or someone would step. Maddox shifted slightly, lowering his paw back to the ground without advancing. He hadn't triggered it, not because of luck, because he had seen it, or felt it, or understood something that didn't require sight. Caleb stood slowly. "Who set something like this here?" Hannah asked. Not rhetorical, genuinely unsettled. Caleb looked out across the clearing, toward the cut lines, toward the places where the forest no longer matched its own memory. "Someone who doesn't want people moving freely out here," he said. They didn't stay long after that. Not because they were afraid, because they had seen enough. On the way back down, the forest felt different, not hostile, but altered, like a place that had been observed long enough to begin observing back. At the edge of the tree line, they found Evan Pike leaning against his truck. He had arrived without announcing it, as usual. Mid-50s, thin but durable, his frame carried more endurance than strength. His hair, once dark, had settled into a natural gray, not from age alone, but from years spent under open sky and long drives between places that didn't always have names. His flannel shirt, deep red with black patterning, was worn at the cuffs, layered beneath a faded denim jacket that had long since stopped trying to look new. His eyes moved slowly, taking in everything, missing nothing. "You went up there," he said. Not a question. Caleb nodded once. Evan's gaze dropped briefly to Maddox, then back to Caleb. "You find what you were looking for?" Caleb paused. "No," he said. A beat. "We found something else." Evan didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. People like him didn't chase information. They waited for it to arrive. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of cut wood from higher up the ridge. Not fresh. Lingering. Like something that refused to fade completely. Caleb rested a hand briefly against Maddox's neck. The dog leaned into it, not seeking comfort, just acknowledging contact. A small, grounding moment. before everything else began to shift. Behind them, the forest stood quiet again, unmoving, but no longer neutral. By the time the video reached Alder Ridge, it was already too late to stop it from becoming something else. Not just footage, not just evidence, a story. And stories, Caleb knew, didn't need to be true to be believed. They only needed to feel right to the people watching them. It began quietly. A post on the town's community page, one of those places where people shared snow warnings, lost dogs, and second-hand tools for sale. The kind of digital space that felt harmless because it had always been small. Until it wasn't. The title didn't accuse, it suggested. We didn't want to post this, but people deserve to know. That was enough. Caleb didn't see it first. Evan Pike did. He stood behind the counter of his gas station, phone held low in one hand, thumb still against the screen long after the video had ended. As the station smelled faintly of fuel and old coffee-familiar, steady things. But something in Evan's expression had shifted, not shock, recognition. He had seen things like this before, not here, but enough times to know what they meant. He exhaled slowly, then looked toward the window, toward the road that led out of town, and the one that led back into the forest. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. By mid-morning, everyone had seen it, or at least enough of it. Caleb watched it alone. He stood just inside his cabin, the door still open behind him, cold air slipping in unnoticed. The screen in his hand felt smaller than it should have, or maybe the moment inside it felt too large. The video shook slightly, handheld, or made to look that way. Grainy in places, clear in others, carefully unclear. He saw himself. There was no mistaking that. The posture, the clothing, the way he moved, economical, direct, without wasted motion. And Maddox. And always Maddox. The scene played out in fragments. Snow, movement, a struggle. Maddox pulling against something unseen. Caleb stepping in, a sharp motion. A push. The dog's body reacting, a sound. Then, cut. No trap. No context. No reason. Just a man. And a dog. And a moment that had been chosen. Caleb didn't replay it. He didn't need to. His memory filled in the missing pieces with a clarity that felt almost cruel. The tension in Maddox's body as the steel held him. The angle of the chain. The calculation where to apply force without causing more damage. The decision. Always the decision. Behind the video, another image spread. Faster, cleaner, more damaging. A photograph. Still. Undeniable in the way still images often were. Caleb standing across from a man in a dark coat. A hand extended, a thick envelope between them. The caption did the rest. So this is who's speaking for us. He closed his eyes briefly. Not in denial, in containment. Outside, a truck passed on the road. Slower than usual. Someone looking, or deciding not to. Maddox stood near the doorway. He hadn't reacted to the video. He didn't understand screens. Didn't need to. But he understood Caleb. The stillness. The way his breathing changed. Not faster, not heavier, just deeper. Controlled. Like something being held in place. The dog stepped closer. Not pressing. Not demanding. Just aligning himself beside Caleb's leg. Close enough to feel. Not close enough to interfere. A knock came an hour later. Not hesitant. not aggressive. Measured. Caleb opened the door. Derek Shaw stood on the porch. Up close, Derek looked older than he had in the forest. The lines around his eyes were more pronounced, the kind that came not from age but from decisions made repeatedly without comfort. His hair was short, practical, touched with gray at the edges, and his jaw carried the rough shadow of stubble he hadn't bothered to shave clean. His uniform green utility jacket, heavy boots, a radio clipped at his shoulder, marked him clearly. Authority. Or at least, the closest thing the town had to it. "Morning," Derek said. His voice was neutral. Carefully so. Caleb stepped aside. Derek didn't enter immediately. His eyes moved once briefly to Maddox, then back. "You've seen it," Derek said. Not a question. Caleb nodded. A pause. Not empty. Waited. "There's been a formal complaint," Derek continued. "From the council." He shifted slightly, adjusting his stance. Not uncomfortable, but aware. "They're calling it potential animal abuse." The words didn't land like accusations. They landed like procedure. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "Do you think that's what it is?" Derek didn't answer right away. He looked at Maddox again. Really looked this time. The dog's posture, his weight distribution, the way he held eye contact, not submissive, not aggressive, trained, stable. "I think," Derek said slowly, "that what I think doesn't change what I'm required to do." Maddox moved. Not toward Caleb. Not toward Derek. Toward the threshold between inside and outside. He stopped there exactly on the line where wood met cold air. Then he sat, facing outward, watching the road, not tense, not alert in the usual way, just waiting, as if something beyond the visible line of sight had already announced itself, and he had chosen where to be when it arrived. Derek noticed. He didn't comment, but something in his expression tightened. "I have to take him in," Derek said. The sentence came out quieter than the others, more human. Caleb didn't move immediately, not because he was considering resistance, because he was calculating consequence. If he refused, force. If he argued, delay. If he complied, control. His hand rested briefly against Maddox's neck. The dog didn't turn, didn't seek reassurance, didn't question. "Temporary?" Caleb asked. "Pending evaluation," Derek replied. "Behavioral? Medical." A beat. "Standard process." Caleb nodded once. No argument, no protest. Derek exhaled, almost imperceptibly. Not relief. Something close. He stepped forward then, crouching slightly, not out of caution, but respect for the space the animal occupied. "Maddox," he said, low and steady. The dog turned his head. Amber eyes meeting his. For a second, Derek hesitated. Just a fraction. As if something about that gaze didn't align with the situation he had been given. Then procedure returned. He clipped the lead to the harness. Not roughly, not gently, just correctly. Maddox stood. He didn't pull, didn't resist, didn't look back at Caleb immediately. That was the part that stayed with him. Not obedience, not training, choice. At the doorway, Maddox paused, just long enough to turn his head. Their eyes met. No sound passed between them. No command. No reassurance. Just recognition. Then the dog stepped forward, out into the cold. The truck door closed with a dull, final sound. Caleb stood in the doorway long after it drove away. The air inside the cabin felt different now. Larger. Colder. Not because something had been taken. Because something had been removed. The town did not confront Caleb. That would have been easier. Anger had shape, direction, something a man could stand against and push back. What Alder Ridge gave him instead was distance. Quiet, careful, almost polite distance that felt heavier than accusation. By the second day, the road outside his cabin felt longer, not because it changed, but because people did. A truck slowed once as it passed, tires crunching softly over frozen gravel, then continued without stopping. Two neighbors who used to nod without thinking now hesitated just enough to make the absence of that gesture noticeable. It was not rejection, not openly. It was uncertainty, and uncertainty spread faster than truth ever could. Inside the cabin, the silence settled into the corners like something that had always been there, waiting for space to expand. Maddox's absence did not echo, it pressed. The spot near the door where the dog usually lay was not empty. It felt paused, as if the space itself was holding a breath it refused to release. Caleb moved through the cabin with the same routine he had always followed. Coffee. Perimeter check. Equipment scan. Nothing changed in action, only in weight. There was no second rhythm beside him now. No quiet presence adjusting to his movement. He did not call for the dog. He did not check the door. He understood something most people did not. If you acknowledged absence too early, it altered judgment, and right now, judgment had to remain clean. Still, when his hand passed the hook where Maddox's spare lead usually hung, it slowed for a fraction of a second. Not long enough to be called hesitation. Just long enough to register that something was no longer where it should be. By mid-morning, Caleb was already in town, not to speak, not to defend, to observe. Alder Ridge had shifted into something more deliberate. People chose where they stood, who they stood near, what they said, and more importantly, what they avoided saying. The community board outside the general store had been layered with printed images, screenshots of the video, copies of the photograph, comments written beneath them in marker, some angry, some confused, some trying too hard to sound neutral. Caleb read them all. Not to react, but to map the pattern. Inside, behind the counter, stood Marilyn Kessler. Late 50s, sturdy frame, auburn hair streaked with gray, pulled into a loose clip that never quite held everything in place. Her face carried the softness of someone who had spent years being kind to people who did not always deserve it, but her eyes had sharpened over time. She had known Caleb since he returned to Alder Ridge, sold him supplies without asking questions, was offered familiarity without intrusion. Today, she did not avoid him, but she did not greet him either. "You need anything?" she asked, her voice even, but careful. Caleb shook his head. "No." A pause settled between them. Marilyn wiped her hands on a cloth that did not need wiping. "You should talk to someone." Not advice, not pressure, concern. "I am," Caleb replied. Her brow creased slightly. "Doesn't look like it." Caleb's gaze shifted briefly toward the board outside, then back. "Looks different from the inside." Marilyn did not answer, because she understood that more than she wanted to. He left without buying anything, not because he did not need to, but because staying longer would not change the direction the town had already begun to move. Outside, the cold had deepened, not in temperature, but in feeling. Across the street, Tom Barrett stood near his truck, mid-40s, lean, were worn down in the way men become when responsibility outweighs rest. His jacket still carried the faded Iron Veil logo, a quiet reminder of what paid his bills and fed his family. His arms were crossed, not defensively, but as if holding something in place. He noticed Caleb. Did not look away. Did not approach either. That was the line now, not hostility. Separation. Caleb met his gaze for a moment. Not challenging, not inviting. Then he moved on. The town did not need a fight to fracture. It only needed enough doubt. Somewhere beyond the buildings, beyond the road that curved toward the forest, a sound rose into the cold air. A single bark. Distant, but distinct. It carried differently than any other sound in Alder Ridge. Not scattered. Not searching. Focused. Caleb stopped. Not because of the volume. Because of the certainty behind it. It was not a call. It was placement. He did not move toward it. Did not react in a way anyone watching would understand. But something inside him aligned, quiet and immediate, like a compass settling into its true direction. Then the sound ended, and the silence that followed pressed heavier than before. At the edge of town, near the fenced property that served as the local animal control facility, Derek Shaw stood alone. The structure was simple. Chain-link enclosures. A small heated office. Built for function, not comfort. Inside one of the runs, Maddox sat. The dog's posture had not changed since he had been brought in. Around 5 or 6 years old, the German Shepherd held himself with controlled stillness. His sable coat caught the light in muted tones of cream, gray, and black. The harness remained secured around his torso, black with a worn red trim that marked him as something more than a pet. He was not pacing. Not whining. Not showing the scattered agitation most confined animals displayed. He was waiting. Derek watched him longer than necessary, long enough for procedure to give way to instinct. He had seen abused dogs before. They flinched at movement, avoided eye contact, anticipated harm before it came. Maddox did none of that. When Derek stepped closer, the dog turned his head and met his gaze directly. Not submissive. Not aggressive. Acknowledging. It unsettled him more than fear would have. "Doesn't add up," Derek muttered quietly. Behind him, the office door opened. A woman stepped out with controlled efficiency. Lena Ortiz. Mid-30s, sharp features, dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Her posture was precise, almost clinical, shaped by years of making decisions that required accuracy over emotion. Her eyes moved quickly, assessing before forming conclusions. "You're still out here?" she asked. Derek nodded toward the enclosure. "Take another look." Lena crouched just outside the barrier, keeping her movements deliberate. She did not reach in. She did not rush. She observed. "Heart rate steady," she said after a moment. "Breathing normal. No visible trauma." "Behavior?" Derek asked. Lena tilted her head slightly, studying Maddox's stillness. This is not a dog conditioned by abuse. No defensive response pattern. No avoidance behavior. If anything, he's regulated. She stood, brushing cold from her gloves. Whatever that video shows, it is not the whole story. Derek nodded once. He had already reached that conclusion. He just needed confirmation from someone trained to see what others missed. Back in town, Caleb stood at the edge of the road, looking toward the tree line without really focusing on it. The distance between him and Alder Ridge had grown, but not in a way that could not be crossed. Not yet. The question was no longer whether something had been done to him. It was how far it would go before it stopped. The wind moved through the town, carrying with it the faint scent of cut wood from the ridge above. It lingered, refusing to disappear completely. Caleb remained where he was, steady, unmoving. But because sometimes the only way to see clearly through shifting ground was to stop moving altogether. The morning of the hearing arrived without ceremony. No storm, no warning. Just a cold, pale light stretching across Alder Ridge like any other day, as if nothing had shifted, as if nothing had been taken apart piece by piece over the past week. But inside the town, people moved differently, slower, more deliberate. Not because they had time, because they understood something was about to be decided. The courthouse sat at the far end of town, a low brick building that had handled small disputes for decades. Property lines, noise complaints, permits, the kind of problems that could be measured, resolved, filed away. Today, it held something else, not just a case, a judgment that would echo beyond the room. Caleb stood outside for a moment before entering. The cold air pressed against his face, sharp and clean, grounding in a way that reminded him of early mornings before missions, back when clarity meant survival. Now, clarity meant something different. It meant not reacting, not rushing, not letting the shape of what others believed change the shape of what he knew. He stepped inside. The warmth hit first, then the quiet, not silence. Expectation. People had gathered early. Some sat with hands folded too tightly in their laps. Others leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the front of the room as if looking hard enough might influence what would happen. A few avoided looking at Caleb entirely, not out of guilt, out of discomfort. At the far side, near the second row, sat Iris Nolan. She looked different from the day of the landslide. Stronger. Not physically, though the color had returned to her face. It was something else. A steadiness that came from having seen something clearly and refusing to let it be rewritten. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her temples. Her posture was upright, hands resting calmly together. But her eyes followed Caleb the moment he entered. Not questioning, not uncertain, present. Near the aisle stood Evan Pike, arms folded across his chest, shoulders slightly hunched, as if conserving warmth even indoors. His gaze moved slowly, tracking people rather than events. He did not speak. He rarely did. But he had positioned himself where he could see both the front of the room and the entrance behind him. A man who understood that what mattered often happened between the obvious moments. At the front sat the representative from Iron Vale Timber, Grant Holloway. Mid-40s, tall, composed in a way that suggested control was something he maintained deliberately rather than naturally. His dark coat was pressed, his posture precise. Clean hands, no visible strain. His face held no expression of hostility. That was the detail Caleb noted first. Hostility could be read. This was something else. Calculation. Grant did not look at Caleb immediately. When he did, it was brief, measured, then gone. Beside him sat a man Caleb had not seen before. Andrew Cole, legal counsel for Iron Vale. Late 30s, narrow build, sharp-featured with a clean shave that emphasized the angular lines of his face. His hair was dark, parted precisely, and his eyes carried the restless alertness of someone who processed information quickly and spoke even faster. His fingers moved constantly, tapping once against the folder in front of him, then stilling as if aware of the habit. He did not look up. Not yet. At the opposite side, near the bench, stood Judge Harold Whitaker. 62. Broad-shouldered even in age, with silver hair combed back neatly and a face that had settled into neutrality over years of listening to people tell partial truths. He was not unkind, but he was not easily moved. His presence quieted the room without effort. Caleb took his place. Not at the center, slightly to the side, where he could see everything. The proceedings began without delay. Formalities, statements, the measured rhythm of law-placing structure over something that had already grown beyond simple categories. Andrew Cole spoke first. His voice was smooth, controlled, each word placed with intention. "We are not here to question Mr. Rourke's past service," he began. "Nor are we here to undermine the respect this community has for him." A pause. Just long enough to create alignment. "We are here because there is evidence suggesting behavior inconsistent with that trust." The word evidence landed carefully, not aggressively, convincingly. The video was presented, not in full, not with context. The same fragments, the same angles, the same cut. From the back of the room, a shift. Not loud, but noticeable. People leaning slightly forward, reconfirming what they thought they already knew. The photograph followed. Still, clean, and irrefutable in appearance. Caleb did not look away. He watched it the same way he had the first time. Not reacting, not denying, understanding. Across the room, as the image remained projected, something small happened that most people missed. Iris did not look at the screen, not even once. Her eyes stayed on Caleb, unbroken, unwavering, as if the truth she recognized did not exist in pixels or frames, but in something far more difficult to manipulate. And in that quiet refusal to look away from him, something in the room shifted. Not loudly, not enough to change the outcome yet, but enough to plant doubt where certainty had been growing too easily. Andrew continued, building structure around perception. "Actions, when isolated, can be misleading," he said, "but when combined with supporting context, they form a pattern." He gestured lightly toward the photograph. "A pattern we cannot ignore." The judge nodded slightly. "Proceed." There was no immediate defense, not from Caleb, and he did not interrupt, did not challenge, because he understood timing better than most. From the side, movement. Derek Shaw stepped forward. He had not been seated with either side. He stood where he could be called, where he could choose. "Your Honor," Derek said, voice steady but carrying something beneath it now. Not hesitation, not uncertainty. Weight. "I'd like to provide an observation." Andrew's eyes flicked toward him briefly. Measured. "Proceed," the judge said. Derek did not rush. He spoke the way someone does when they know what they are about to say matters beyond the room. "I've handled animal cases for over a decade," he began. "Neglect, abuse, behavioral instability." He glanced briefly toward Caleb, then back. "I know what those patterns look like." A pause. "The animal in question does not display them." A murmur. Small. Contained. Andrew stepped in quickly. "Behavioral responses can vary depending on..." They don't vary that much, Derek cut in. Not aggressively, factually. The room shifted again, subtly. From the back, another movement. Iris stood. She did not wait to be called. She did not ask permission. "I was there," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. Because it did not try to. Every eye turned. Caleb did not. He already knew she would speak. "I was under the snow," she continued. "I remember what it felt like when I couldn't breathe." Her hands remained steady. Her gaze did not waver. "I remember who came for me." She turned, just slightly, not toward the screen, toward Caleb. "And I remember the dog." Silence. Not imposed. Chosen. The judge leaned forward slightly, not convinced, not dismissive, listening. The structure of the case had not broken, not yet, but it had begun to crack. And cracks, Caleb knew, were where everything started to change. The room did not erupt when Iris finished speaking. It did something more fragile than that. It held. Silence stretched across the courtroom, not forced by authority, but chosen by the people inside it. A quiet that came from something shifting beneath certainty, like ice beginning to crack under weight that had been ignored too long. Judge Whitaker did not interrupt. He allowed the moment to settle, his eyes moving slowly from Iris to Derek, then finally to Caleb. "Continue," he said. Andrew Cole adjusted his posture slightly, the controlled rhythm of his breathing tightening just enough to be noticed by someone trained to read it. His fingers rested flat against the folder now, no longer tapping. He had lost a degree of momentum, not enough to derail his argument, but enough to force recalculation. "Testimony based on personal experience," Andrew said, his tone still smooth, though less assured. "While compelling, does not invalidate visual evidence." He gestured lightly toward the screen. "Context can be interpreted. Evidence remains consistent." Caleb watched him, not with hostility, but with the same quiet attention he had given the forest. The trap, the shifting ground beneath Alder Ridge. Patterns. Intent. Timing. The room leaned back toward the structure Andrew offered, because structure was easier than uncertainty. Easier than admitting something might have been built on incomplete truth. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Not loudly, but enough. Every head turned. A man stepped in, breath visible in the cold air that slipped in behind him. He wore a maintenance jacket, dark blue, worn at the elbows, with a tool belt hanging loosely at his side. His hair was thinning, graying unevenly, and his face carried the flushed redness of someone who had moved quickly in cold air. Paul Henriksen, mid-50s, county maintenance technician, the kind of man no one noticed until something stopped working. He hesitated at the threshold, eyes scanning the room, uncertain if he had arrived too late or exactly when he was needed. "Your Honor," he said, voice slightly rough from the cold. "I think I have something you need to see." Andrew's expression shifted, just slightly. Not alarm. Awareness. Judge Whitaker studied Paul for a moment, measuring credibility not from appearance, but from the way he held himself. "Approach," the judge said. Paul stepped forward, boots leaving faint traces of melted snow behind him. He carried a small device in his hand, turning it once as if confirming it was still there. "I maintain the external systems for the municipal grid," he explained. "Traffic cams, street feeds, some of the older surveillance units near the industrial zones." He glanced briefly toward the representatives from Ironvale, and then back to the judge. "There's a camera line that runs near the upper access road. It doesn't always record clean, but it logs movement. He swallowed once. I reviewed the feed from the day this happened. The room shifted again. Not louder. Deeper. Paul handed the device to the clerk, who connected it to the system with careful, deliberate movements. The screen flickered, then changed. The image was not sharp, not cinematic, but it was clear enough. A wide-angle view of the forest access road. Snow along the edges, tire tracks cutting through in defined lines. A vehicle appeared. Dark. Unmarked. It stopped near the tree line. Time passed. Then movement. 2 figures stepped out. One of them carried something. Metal glinted briefly in the light. They moved off camera. The timestamp matched the day Caleb and Maddox had gone into the forest. The feed skipped, returned. The figures came back. One adjusted something near the edge of the road before stepping into the vehicle again. Then they were gone. The image froze. No commentary. No labels. Just sequence. Cause. Placement. The absence of randomness. Andrew stepped forward immediately. This does not directly connect to my client, he said. There is no identifiable marker, no confirmation of... It confirms something was placed, Derek said, stepping in before the argument could take shape. Not loudly, but firmly. Something not reported. Something not authorized. Judge Whitaker raised a hand slightly, signaling both to pause. The room had shifted again. Not in chaos. In alignment. Pieces that had existed separately now beginning to fit. Caleb did not move. He did not react outwardly. But something inside him settled. Not relief. Recognition. The truth did not need force. It needed time. Then, before the judge could speak again, something else happened. A sound. Faint at first. A scrape. Metal against metal. Then the back door, the same one Paul had entered through, moved again. This time it did not open all the way, and it shifted. Enough for something to pass through. A shape. Low. Fast. Silent until it wasn't. Maddox entered the courtroom. Not running wildly. Not confused. Focused. His movement cut through the room with a precision that silenced every voice before it could rise. His coat was dusted lightly with frost, the sable pattern catching the indoor light in muted tones. The harness was still secured, though one side showed signs of strain, the strap slightly twisted as if it had been pulled free rather than unclipped. No one moved to stop him, not immediately, because for a moment no one understood what they were seeing. Then he crossed the space between the door and Caleb. Direct. Unbroken. He did not slow. Did not hesitate. He reached Caleb and rose just enough to press his weight forward, front paws bracing lightly against his legs, his head pushing into Caleb's chest with a force that was not aggression, not desperation, but certainty. Caleb's body reacted before his mind did. His hands came up, one settling against Maddox's neck, fingers pressing into the thick fur as if confirming something real. The room watched. Not a screen, not a recording. Reality. Unedited. Uncut. Andrew did not speak. For the first time since the hearing began, he had nothing prepared for what stood in front of him, because there was no version of the narrative that accounted for this. A dog presented as abused did not move like this, did not choose proximity, did not close distance without hesitation. Judge Whitaker leaned forward slightly, his expression unchanged, but his attention sharpened. "Control the animal," he said, though his tone carried less command than observation. Derek moved, but slower than expected, not rushing to restrain, but approaching with awareness. Maddox did not react to him. His focus remained on Caleb, on contact, on presence. Caleb lowered his head slightly, his forehead resting briefly against the dog's. No words passed. None were needed, because everything that had been questioned was now visible, not proven through argument, through behavior. Andrew recovered first. "This is irregular," he said, though the strength had left his voice. "This does not." "It clarifies," Judge Whitaker interrupted. Not loudly, decisively. The room stilled again. Different this time. Not waiting. Understanding. The judge's gaze moved across the room, taking in the sequence that had unfolded. The footage. The testimony. The animal. The response. He exhaled slowly. "In my years on this bench," he said, "I have seen evidence presented in many forms." He paused. Some of it constructed, some of it incomplete. His eyes settled on Caleb, then briefly on Maddox. "And some of it," he continued, "requires no interpretation." The gavel came down. Not hard, not dramatic. Final. "Charges related to animal abuse are dismissed pending further investigation into the presented material. Mr. O'Rourke is to be released without restriction." The room did not explode. It released. A collective breath that had been held too long. Iris closed her eyes briefly, not in relief, but in confirmation. Derek stepped back, the tension in his posture easing for the first time since he had arrived at Caleb's cabin. Evan Pike gave a small, almost invisible nod, as if something he had expected had finally arrived. Grant Holloway did not react. Not outwardly, but his stillness had changed. Less controlled, more contained. Caleb remained where he was, one hand still resting against Maddox. The world had not corrected itself, not entirely, but something had been restored, enough to stand on. For now. Some stories are not about winning a case. They are about something deeper, something that cannot be edited, cut, or controlled by the world. What happened in that courtroom was not just evidence. It was a reminder that truth does not always arrive through perfect words or polished arguments. Sometimes it comes through loyalty, through instinct, through a bond so pure that no lie can survive in its presence. Maybe that is what a miracle looks like in our world today. Not lightning in the sky, not voices from above, but quiet moments where something unseen steps in at the exact second it is needed. A door left open, a path found without sight, a heart that refuses to turn away. God does not always speak loudly. Sometimes he moves through what we almost ignore, through timing that feels impossible, and through love that does not need proof to be real. And in our own lives, we all face moments where truth feels buried, where people misunderstand us, where the world seems louder than what we know is right. But just like Caleb, there will come a moment when what is real stands on its own, not forced, not defended, just seen. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of the story stayed with you the most. Subscribe to the channel so these stories can continue reaching more people who need a reminder that faith, loyalty, and truth still matter. And wherever you are right now, may God watch over you, guide your steps, and protect your heart.